Hey, it's Huck. And if you remember, I told you, with a few days to go before the election, that rather than being worried about the outcome, I was having the time of my life watching the Romney campaign and their surrogates on Fox News expose themselves for the charlatans and deeply disturbed psychopaths they truly were. Not only was I right, but little did I know that the fun was just beginning. For Mitt Romney, of course, the game is up. There are a few voices in the wilderness, like, I don't know, Grover Norquist and maybe members of his own family perhaps, who are blaming the loss on Obama's depiction of Romney as something he's not. But that's complete bullshit, and everybody knows it. Romney was portrayed as exactly what he has always been, a spoiled, rich, heartless bastard who beat up gay kids in his youth, tossed thousands of struggling, hard-working middle-class folks out of work to enrich himself and his rich buddies, who wore out his welcome so quickly in the only place he ever held office that his outgoing poll approval numbers were second only to our current Congress. I knew all along that there was just no way a majority of Americans would elect as president a guy whose only qualification seemed to be his own belief that it was somehow his birthright. Goodbye and good riddance, Mr. Romney. It's just too bad we may have to wait another election cycle or two to get rid of your running mate, Paul Ryan, and the rest of his evil clones. But what has been fun in the aftermath of President Obama's decisive electoral and popular vote victory has been watching the Republican Party attempt to explain the loss and the massive failure of their attempt to retake the Senate. I was at work when Ohio was called for Obama Tuesday night, and Mr. GOP moneybags Karl Rove had his conniption fit live on Fox News. So I couldn't pop that bottle of champagne and celebrate his meltdown as I would have liked. Rove made at least $30 million on this election. His take of the $390 million he conned from the multimillionaires and billionaires who mistakenly believed their investment would get Romney elected. They could just taste all that capital gains income, freed from that pesky 15% tax. Now it seems their capital gains tax will go up about 5%. Some investment, huh? I guess I should pop that bottle of champagne anyway. Now my favorite comment, and I gotta be careful here because there are just so many, was something Grover Norquist said the other day. After blaming Romney's loss on a mischaracterization of Romney, he went on to show just how little this election has taught him and those who signed his nefarious no-tax pledge by claiming that those who voted for Obama didn't understand America because they went to public schools. No, seriously, that's what he said. Right after he said Obama made Romney out to be a poopy head. His words, no kidding. And I hope Norquist and his fellow conservatives keep on saying things like that because, like Richard Murdoch and Todd Aiken, like Alan West and Joe Walsh, like dozens of other lunatic fringe far-right extremists who lost in this election, Norquist's comments are an accurate portrait of just how crazy today's Republican Party has become. When they say small government, they mean no government, except where it benefits the wealthiest elite in the country, like subsidies to the oil and gas industries, for instance, or further bloating our defense contractors with more fat government contracts. In Norquist's world, any taxpayer dollar spent on anyone or anything actually needing assistance is outrageous. It must always be used to pad the profit margins of those who need it least. The more folks get to see the inner minds of Republicans, the more they marvel at how narrow those minds are. There have been a few sensible Republicans, and when I say sensible, I mean those who at least occasionally leave the conservative talking heads bubble long enough to glimpse the real world. There have been a few, here and there, who are beginning to understand that the conservative agenda has no future. You cannot garner the youth vote with policy positions that are anti-gay, anti-birth control, and anti-Pell Grant. And the GOP is never going to close the gender gap with women, with policies that treat women as if we lived in the time of Moses. And they will never win the Hispanic or black vote, as long as they propose policies that demand they leave the country, or ask them to respect the Confederate call to states' rights, or when they deny the poor and uneducated access to medical care and a quality education. Even top-tier conservative Bill Kristol suddenly made a sensible comment the other day, saying proposed increases in tax rates for the rich would do no serious harm for the country. Of course, this goes against everything he and every other Republican have been saying for more than 20 years now, against the very core of what Romney campaigned on. You see, this election, more so than practically any before it, clearly drew a line in the sand between Democrats and conservatives, between austerity cuts at the expense of those who are desperate and suffering the most, or toward long overdue sacrifices asked of those at the very top who have had it all their own way for decades. The American people spoke loud and clear for shared sacrifice and progressive policies, policies that will help the poor and middle class, against policies that benefit the very few who don't need the help. The 2012 election was a sharp rebuke to the party that spent the last 4 years wholly committed to sabotaging the economy and defeating this president, who they've demeaned and ridiculed as un-American and incompetent. The American people knew better all along. And so the question is, what becomes of the incredible shrinking Republican Party now? Do they back down? Do they moderate their extreme agenda? Do they recognize that they cannot continue to maintain anti-minority, anti-women, anti-middle-class policies and compete in major elections in the future? Don't kid yourself. That would be rational. And there is nothing rational about the folks still seated on the Republican side of the aisle. Most folks are saying what a terrible night Karl Rove had. What a miserable showing for spending $390 million. But the fact is, I see it differently. It did manage to lessen the damage, because it could have been much, much worse for the Republican Party in 2012. Two facts about this election should make this crystal clear, and should serve to tell us something, too, about the intentions of Republicans in the days ahead. Fact one, the Romney-Ryan ticket garnered 1.4 million less votes than John McCain and Sarah Palin did in 2008. And remember, the 2008 election was the worst ass-kicking Republicans had suffered in a presidential election since 1964. Think about that. Romney couldn't even muster as many votes as McCain received at the height of all that chaos in November of 2008, with two wars going haywire, an economy in freefall, and jobs being lost at the rate of water flowing over Niagara Falls. Romney got 1.5 million less votes than the guy who was running at a time when even whispering the words George Bush or Dick Cheney put you at serious risk of immediate physical assault. An assault that no grand jury in the country would indict you for. Now you would think Republicans would look at that number and say, what the fuck? How the hell could we get less votes in 2012? After all the hard work we put in, demonizing President Obama for 4 long years. After all the Marxisms, communisms, socialisms, and death panel slurs we threw at him. All the sham congressional investigations we tortured him and his federal agencies with. After all our diligent obstruction of everything Democrat. This is the result? 1,400,000 votes less? Fact 2. President Obama received even a sharper reduction of votes from what he received in 2008. A whopping 7.6 million less, to be exact. So yes, those 4 years of misinformation, distortion, and personal attacks, of relentless GOP obstinance and obstruction, and unprecedented voter suppression tactics, all work to an amazing degree. But it also means that all that money spent by Romney's campaign and the $390 million from Karl Roves' billionaires took a very heavy toll. It kept an awful lot of people home. People that wouldn't vote for Romney, but kept an awful lot of people from voting for Obama as well. That, in a nutshell, is how Republicans win elections. By purging eligible voters, frustrating minority voters with long lines and registration hurdles, and then lying through their teeth with as much advertised false Jeep plant closings as billionaires are willing to fund. The truth is, the Republicans could have won this election, despite all of this. But they fielded a candidate who was the poster boy of everything wrong with our economy. The outsourcer-in-chief who made his millions ripping off companies for every dime he could strip them of while tossing workers into the street. A guy who had more money stashed offshore dodging taxes than your favorite star athlete earns under his current contract. A guy who called half of America moochers. Forget that his policies were astonishingly destructive for America. That isn't what kept him from grasping the golden ring. A more nuanced conservative, like a Chris Christie of New Jersey or Jeb Bush of Florida, might have fared better. A lot of folks went into this election thinking Romney might win the popular vote, but lose in the Electoral College due to Obama's advantage in some key swing states. Fact is, Romney came excruciatingly close to winning the Electoral College and the presidency, but losing the popular vote. Much closer than those 3 million overall difference in votes suggests. A switch or an additional 104,000 votes in Ohio, 106,000 votes in Virginia, 77,000 votes in New Mexico, and 75,000 votes in Florida would have given Romney the 271 electoral votes and the highest office in the land. That's just 362,000 votes that kept Romney out of the presidency. Less than 0.3% of the total vote. How small is that margin? Consider that fourth place finisher, Green Party candidate Jill Stein, got 420,000 votes, 60,000 more than Romney needed to win. While Obama's campaign is receiving effusive praise for their sophisticated get-out-the-vote efforts that resulted in 7.5 million less votes than Obama got in 2008, consider that Romney's team bungled their new sophisticated digitalized get-out-the-vote program. In fact, they so bungled it that thousands and thousands of Romney volunteers couldn't even access their voter roll lists on Election Day due to a software glitch, and they couldn't communicate with their supervisors who were not answering their cell phones. They were left completely blind as to whose doors to knock on, who needed rides to the polls, and who needed the nudge to get them out the door. Could 30,000 Romney volunteers have drummed up those 362,000 additional votes? As Sarah Palin would say, you betcha. That's how close this election was. Romney was so intimidated by the vaunted boots-on-the-ground network of the Obama team that he rushed into service a new system that failed to ever get out of the starting blocks. I suspect, after all the hand-wringing is over, That's what Republicans are going to take away from this election. They won't look at it as a problem of extreme policies or narrow demographics. They're going to look at it as failed execution, a bad candidate, and interference from Mother Nature, not policy. Like heroin addicts who know their habit is likely to kill them, they just can't stop themselves. Besides, they're in a symbiotic relationship with all those Bible-toting, gay-bashing, science-denying, Confederate flag-waving folks who keep voting for them. To give up on these policies is to start from scratch. Move to the center? In case you haven't noticed, that's where the Democratic Party, for all intents and purposes, is these days. They're not socialist liberals. They're centrists. Hell, under Eisenhower and Nixon, the tax rate on millionaires ranged from 90% to 70%. Democrats are fighting for a rate increase moving from 35 to 39%. Obamacare is a 1990s Republican healthcare plan. Move to the center. It's fucking occupied. It's occupied by Democrats. Since 1988, Republicans have failed to win even 50% of the vote in a presidential election 5 times out of 6. Fewer and fewer Americans are buying what Republicans are selling. Democrats have moved to the center, pushed there by the ever further right-leaning GOP. Ultimately, the Republican Party has found themselves so far out on the limb, they must either pull themselves back from the brink or fall. But then, these are the same folks that think nothing of tossing their best candidates under the bus to move further and further to the right. When they lost a House or Senate seat, as they often do in the process, their attitude always comes down to screw them, because they want true conservative Neanderthals. That, friends, is the great lesson of this election, that these folks are never going to change. They will keep proposing and passing bad policy because that's who they are. They are a cancer without a cure. The only solution is to be rid of them once and for all. The Republican Party is on a very dangerous path. They have their foot on the pedal and no steering mechanism to turn it around. Despite all of the reasons that should be apparent for their need to broaden their base and moderate their positions, they have purged their party of all common sense. If they hope to change, to remain relevant in major elections, they'll first have to do something about all of the nuts and crazies already in office. These folks are so strident in their beliefs, so repulsed by science and reason, so immersed in the religious extremists, bigots, and billionaires' greed that brought them to power, they are simply incapable of going back. The Republican Party will only find room for reason and moderation if they first cannibalize themselves. Problem we must recognize is what brought them to office in the first place. The extremists in the Republican Party are largely the only folks who show up consistently every 4 years for the midterm elections. These crazies come to power in midterm elections, not in presidential election years when everyone shows up. Until Democrats turn out in these off-year congressional and gubernatorial elections, these half-wits will continue to hold power in state and federal offices. The real hope for the Republican Party, at least as long as it remains the law under Citizens United, is that the billionaires begin spending a bit more wisely 2 years from now and spend big time to rid their own party of its radicals for more rational, moderate Republicans. Imagine that. Karl Rove begging billionaires to rid the party of incumbent Republicans. Of course, that wouldn't be necessary if Democrats showed up for midterm elections, but given that 7.5 fewer Democrats turn out this time around with everything at stake in this election, I'm not going to hold my breath. Koch brothers, are you paying attention? Anyway, I'm Huck. Thanks for watching. See you real soon.